Hello, everybody, and welcome to this, the only interesting event of this day. Basically, we're talking about the 5G and the future of the world, and I have three great panelists representing kind of three continents. I would ask you to all come to the stage. John is, you heard already speaking, John is coming from all the way of the United States of Donald Trump and the other rest of America. Dude, come to the stage. And he's originally Danish, but in Latvia, I know this is not a good word to say these days. Then Ingmārs is coming from LMT. You heard probably him speaking too. He's running the commercial business of LMT. And probably the most interesting speaker, because you heard those two gentlemen before, Rose is coming all the way from Tanzania. She's an engineer, and she uses drones to do agriculture. Upstairs. Can I stay here, please? We have a headline of valleys and lows and highs, but talking about the future of the 5G. 5G makes headlines every single day, mostly because of politics. Rose revealed behind the stage that she has also worked for Huawei, which made her even more interesting.
Dark side.
But I mean, John has worked with a number of the big network operators and a number of the big network equipment makers. Ingmārs, as a customer, is working with the biggest one here, or working with as a customer of the network equipment vendors. My first question to you guys is, how big issue is security? How much 5G is a security issue?
Very big. It's bigger than people realize. We must remember, if we go back in history, telecommunication was something, if someone wanted to listen to you and I talk, they had to sit a person and listen to it. Nowadays, you can monetize millions of things. But I would say in a different way, what is the most vital society infrastructure? And the most vital infrastructure in a society today is telecommunication, because if the telecommunication networks breaks down, it's just a matter of hours before companies start to go bankrupt, okay? And close down. And the discussion about Huawei is not about Huawei, it's about China. Everyone can agree that China's security risk to the Western world, that's not a debate. And what I'm always saying to people is, I don't want to discuss about Huawei is a threat in itself or not. We can agree that China is, but I always ask, I was doing a workshop for government, and I said, what is the most vital for your society? The F-35 fighter planes, which you have bought from the Americans, or the telecommunication infrastructure? And then they said to me, it's of course a telecommunication infrastructure. I said, that's fine, but why did you buy F-35 fighter planes? Why didn't you buy Chinese fighter planes? You could probably get them much cheaper. And I think it's very important to understand that what's happening, if we look at the financial sector, you're from Estonia, and we know the story about Danske Bank and so on. But we have done is we have in the financial sector put in a lot of compliance where we say to banks, you have to monetize your customers, find those who do money laundering, those who do criminal activities, turn them into the authorities with the documentation. And what we then will happen in the telecommunication industry, that because of all the cyber attacks, because of all the hackers and all those things, a lot of obligations will be put on the shoulders of the operators, so they should do it. And then the question is, do you want to work with a vendor where it's easy to do compliance with, or is one where it's difficult? And actually, we're under some rules. So for us, it's about compliance, and we say cybersecurity is much bigger than people realize. We have a naive, old-fashioned view of these things. And sometimes telecom operators, in a part of the process of deciding about how we should do this cybersecurity, I say take it out of their hands because they have commercial interests. We have people like the NATO guy here, those people who know much more about it, and that's the kind of people who's going to handle this in the future.
Ingmārs, as an operator.
I can a little bit support in viewing particularly how the vendor sale works. I mean, of course, we are working with Nokia for ages, and we are very happy with Nokia and so on. But I've seen around the world that, let's say, the Huawei marketing side is really, really strong. I mean, they're very fast, very aggressive. They're pushing down prices. And if you are, particularly if you are a smaller operator, it's very lucrative for you actually to fall in this side, and just because it's it's sometimes faster, it's sometimes cheaper, and so on. So it's quite hard to resist for many operators this temptation to go into the bed with the Chinese Communist Party, so to speak.
You probably have a different view, right?
Yes. I see a fight of vendors. I used to work for Huawei, so I no longer represent anything about Huawei. Yes. But I want to talk about something that is dear to my heart, something that I do right now. I'm into the agriculture sector where we use drones for agriculture. And for me, agriculture is about food systems. And when we're talking about
security.
Exactly, it's about security as well. So as much as we're talking about 5G and also we're talking about drones, for me is how do we do this sustainably? How do we do it in a way that socially it's healthy food, again, economically it's profitable to the farmers, and then environmentally it's not food wasted. We all know that by 2050 we're going to have more people, and that means the farmer that is farming in this area today has to produce twice as much. So when we're talking about these drones and 5G, I see that we're talking about data that can enable this farmer to actually produce as much. So what kind of data is in that system? For him, it's his business. It's also about livelihood. So when security is being breached at that point in time, then it's about his whole being. It's about the foods. It's about whether that is healthy or not. So those are the things that come to mind whenever you talk about security.
But a little bit, normally when you talk about the 5G and security, it always goes into the dark colors, that the security and the scary stuff and everything else. But from a little bit building from what Rose said, I think what we are saying that 5G can bring security in the zones where it wasn't possible. Like in Europe, you will not be able to fly drones around the country without some decent telco solution that actually controls these drones. And 5G can actually create an extra layer, separated layer in the network that you can actually very securely and nicely manage these drones and actually create security layer that wasn't thinkable before.
But in Tanzania, you're using already drones for agriculture. Is someone using them in Latvia for agriculture yet?
There are some very nice teams. Actually, not they are mounting, yes, in agriculture and in the forestry. There are beautiful teams that are using multi-spectrum analysis for forest control and agricultural control, and they are exporting this service all over Europe. Actually,
but they use 5G or not?
No,
okay.
no, because there is no 5G. So
there is no 5G, okay.
There's no 5G, and
in
right
Tanzania
now,
either?
yes.
There will be, so
There will
lots
be?
of.
You
there
sure?
is just a little bit. Yes, I am quite.
But then now the thing is, whenever we're talking about 5G, even right now, 4G has not reached the rural parts, which is where agriculture takes place. So even when we're talking about 5G, it's still about the urban places. So I think for me is how does this become, in a way, like again, when it comes to economics, very affordable in a way that telcos can actually put it in the rural area, and we can now start using it for other uses like agriculture.
Yeah, and the problem is kind of across the world, of course. I'm living on an island in Saaremaa where I don't have too much connection at home. The telcos networks don't often reach it. So it's not an African problem, it's not Latvian problem, we have it everywhere. But John, your take on the 5G, I mean, they say that there is actually no 5G.
No, but I would say what we will see is, there's two things. When we always talk about 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G, OG, and so on. But in reality, we must say what's happened with 4G. And 4G created technology shift, and it went extremely fast. And the reason was that the operators used to have a separate 2G network and a separate 3G network. And basically then 4G came, and for the cost of building more capacity in existing network, they could set up new base stations which supported 2G, 3G, 4G. 90% of all the base stations the operators have in Europe today, what we see on top of rooftops and so on, have to be replaced anyhow. So we need to replace all that anyhow, and the new base stations is supporting the old and the new technologies like that. So 5G will come. 5G will be free, more or less. The cost, the operators don't increase their capex to roll it out. We have already seen, we saw the numbers for UK. Despite the fact there's been limitation of using Huawei in the UK, they're banned in 65% of the country. There will be no additional cost for the operators in the UK. And what I think is very important to understand that when we look at the cost of doing that, deploying 5G, it will be very cheap compared to, because it's just, we're deploying infrastructure anyhow and upgrading all the time. That's one thing that's important. I think it's about capacity. It's about making a factory bigger and produce more traffic faster and cheaper. That's what it's all about. And then I think the first phase, it will be a substitute to DSL. It will be a DSL killer. That will be the first phase, and including the first phase, we will see this, what we in the US call CBIS, these corporate Wi-Fi, corporate 5G networks, and we will see a lot of services there. And then when we move down in the second generation or third generation 5G, we will start to see all the other things we see and hear about with the drones and self-driving cars and so on. But that's further down the road compared to where we are today.
And so basically, as somebody, probably Ingmārs, you showed or somebody showed the Gartner hype cycle. I mean, for the next 2 years, we'll be speaking probably about the death of the 5G, right?
Totally.
Yeah, yes and no, because I would say there's some countries where you really see it happening a lot. Like I said, the US, this is not to put it up, because for many years the US was behind Europe, okay? Now they are heads in front of us. So I think it's important to say that there is some cycles. And you can say this country had, when the wall went down 30 years ago, the infrastructure was not so good. And then you actually went quite early with a very high fiber penetration. And you have in the Baltic countries a lot of fiber compared to other countries in Europe with still stuck on old infrastructure technology. So I think it's Poland is split, the country split into two parts. You had a big flooding in one of the parts, and that was wiped out of the main part of the telecom infrastructure, and that was replaced with fiber. So in half of Poland, you have a lot of fiber, and the other half you don't. So it's quite interesting to see what's happening, and that's backbone. But I think this, with the 5G for broadband, 5G FWA as we call it, fixed wireless access and alternative, I think there will be a lot happening a lot.
John, but you said that 5G will be free. I mean, as an LMT, you're doing commercial budgets. How the hell is it free?
I think what John meant is that it's a contradiction to general hype idea that introducing 5G will somehow demand enormous capital investment, that where will we get it, all this strange stuff. But I totally agree that 5G will happen normally. I mean, we have some quite decent capital investment each year. It will just go on, and we slowly will end placing 4G stations, will just go on, slowly roll on to just 5G. There is no huge spikes foreseeable.
Is it free because Huawei is the front runner and everything from China is for free because they want to win the market?
These days are long gone, and things for China were for free, I think, right? Or there's always a cost, as there's the saying, if this is for free, then you are the product.
And we also have to look at it. If we have right now in the Nordic region 3 big network swaps. Telenor Norway swapping out the Huawei, the same as Telia is doing to Ericsson. They made the decision on commercial. You have TDC in Denmark also made a commercial decision. In the Netherlands, the KPN is going the different way. They're going for Huawei, that's fair enough. But none of those operators have reporting increasing capex investments, and none of those operators have reported that there will be a delay in rollout of 5G because of they swapping the whole network.
There's only one reason that can actually stop 5G rollout, and that's legal. And legal and administrative burden for us, for the telco operators, to actually build stations. We are fighting DSL for like 6 years now, very successfully. We are now the second biggest fixed broadband vendor, and we are only 4G based. So we are fighting the fixed operators with the 4G technology very successfully, and logically, in some geographies, our network is being congested. And we would be very happy to actually build more and build more capacity. There is no legal rights and ability for us to build the base station. So going on with the 5G, there will be more base stations needed eventually. So the main limitation to 5G rollout is not the budget, it's the operator's rights to actually build more stations. That's the key problem for us.
You could also handle that by deploying more spectrum. And that's where the US is ahead. They're now deploying the millimeter spectrum. They are doing that in many ways. So it's very important to understand that 5G networks is much more intelligent in the future. And we use different kind of spectrums for different kind of things. So we go from stupid mobile networks to very intelligent mobile networks. And it's quite interesting to see that whole process. And the key problem in main countries is the permission to build. We've done some studies across Europe. It shows that 20% of all the mobile sites which an operator planned to build in the existing calendar year, is never getting built before because they can't get the building permission. And we also have problems with landlords which are very greedy, who basically rent out and say, oh, you have a 10 years rental contract and it's expiring, so can you remove your mast? Alternative, you accept that I increase the rent with 500%. Yeah, and that kind of greedy is a huge problem. In Denmark, we run
capitalism.
No, this is not capitalism because they have a local monopoly. But we was fighting that in Denmark for all the Danish operators, and actually the society understand it, and we have changed the laws, we've changed the conditions. We have reduced the cost of rolling out 5G dramatically in Denmark, the time it takes to a building permission. A lot of things where you in the past should have building permissions, you don't need it today. You just build and then send in information in, I have built that there. So I think it's very important. If the society don't start to understand how important this is, you will slow down the digital society. And I was having a meeting with the minister and I said to him, you know one thing, you want your country to be a digital nation and all those things. The problem is that those who are going to deploy the infrastructure, they cannot build it because of some civil servants working in your government or in the municipalities. Municipalities are probably some of the worst guys, actually.
They're very, very different, so very different.
We have a few minutes left. Let's talk about the kind of the future point. John kind of came to the conclusion. We probably have a bunch of young entrepreneurs in the audience who think that, what on earth those old people on the stage are talking about some technology which has no impact on me. You're not using 5G today, but you will be using 5G for flying drones in Africa. Drones are probably interesting for many startups. Building something around them, building software, some kind of the control systems. What else? I mean, what else could be built in the next 2 years which will, take over the world? What's the big opportunity here?
I think to start with drones, I was in a conference like 2 weeks ago for the first ever African Drone Forum. And then we saw a multiple number of uses for drones. So agriculture is just one. But then there's one company that was using this for weather systems. So they float equipments for weather system, and they're able to track weather system at that level of the drone. That is just one. And then, of course, we've heard about people using them for cargo, a lot of that. But then there's one request that was sort of blew my mind. So we know that the World Food Program serves food to places that are either in crisis or need food. And they were looking for drones that could carry tons of food across borders. So you can imagine those kind of uses. So there's multiple kind of uses in that. But then, again, as we are talking about 5G, in Africa, I checked the statistics today, you see that there's only one specialized doctor for 5,000 other people. So that ratio is very huge. And what 5G is bringing us real-time communication. So in a way that if a doctor is in a developed country, can actually use whether it's a robot arm or something in a remote area to do some sort of surgical operation. So those are opportunities that people can actually leverage on as far as 5G is concerned.
So technology as an enabler, not really as the kind of base for building something new, but something which would enable some kind of new services, exactly.
Yeah.
I think one example which has been somewhat in the shadows for the last years because all the attention was always on the industrial use of the 5G and industrial revolution and what businesses will do. But one thing which is appearing out of darkness, and I think it will just speed by the industry, is actually gaming and all the instances where the gaming will actually merge with physical reality. There's this beautiful new buzzword, it's called phygital. And cloud gaming and augmented reality gaming, there is nothing you can do with the 4G there so far because the speeds and the latencies needed for this are unusable in the 4G, but that's a clear and understandable use case for the 5G. So, and I've seen also, and we all have seen that consumer need for entertainment is enormous and beautiful power for building a business case. So I believe that gaming will actually go like this.
John, you're coming from the most advanced 5G nation of the world, right?
Yeah, but I'm Danish and I live maybe part of the time in Denmark, but I live also a lot in the States where I have a house and family. But I think it's interesting to see when you go across the world. There is regions which is interesting. From a historical perspective, I've always been fascinated with Estonia, size of the country and the innovation level, the types of companies you have. Right now, I'm very fascinated what's going on in Kenya. They have like the Silicon Valley of Africa. It's amazing what's going on there. South Africa happening a lot.
So basically, the tip is move either to South Africa, Kenya, or Estonia.
And also Tanzania.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting because Africa used to be, sorry to say it, white people from France, UK, and so on, which explore the region. Now you see it's the South African companies and Nigerian businessmen, which is actually stimulating the economy.
Tanzanian business ladies, of course.
Yeah, but East Africa has a fascinating history. There's some political stuff and issues and so on, but that's bumps on the road. But Africa now, you see, instead of it's white people from the Western world coming there, you see it's African people doing the business, evolving it. I think it was in Tanzania, no, it was in Uganda. Coca-Cola decided they could not run their factory there. They sold it to a local player who turned it around to a fantastic business. So if you have a lot of, you have the advantage in countries like Kenya, Tanzania, South Africa, and Nigeria is born native English to a certain extent. They also have a legal system which is fundamental, is in the British system, so it's easy for people to understand. So there's a lot of interesting things in Africa. The Arctic region is also interesting. I served on the Arctic advisory board of the Arctic Committee for looking at telecommunication, the Arctic region, and so on. The Arctic Economic Council, it's called. And what's happening in the region, if you take a country like Greenland, which is a part of Denmark, but also have a certain kind of independence, and
Trump failed to buy it, right?
No. What Trump wants to say is, Trump says one thing and he means another thing. What he says, he said, Denmark, you have this Arctic region is very important, and right now you just have one naval boat up there, and then you have 56 guys on a slate, 2 slates driving around in the northern part, watching it, and that's what we have of defense people on to defend the whole Greenland. So it's like anyone could take it over with anything in 2 seconds. So he just says either you pull your act together or we help you, and that was the story. But what's happening there is very interesting. There's happening a lot. All the satellite communication we see in these KU satellites, low orbits, was provided with broadband and so on. There's happening so many things, but it's not like in the old days where we said Silicon Valley or we said Estonia. It's spreading all over the world, and different regions have different cases, and it becomes more important to join events like this, where people come from different parts of the world and share their knowledge and their visions and their cases and their ideas, because we are living in a true global world now.
Good, that's a good point to wrap it up. TechChill is very important. That's the conclusion of this panel. Good. Thank you all.